Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of The Crystal Cocoon. We are your hosts, Bran Lapierre and Jesse Dujari. For today's episode, we have a special Thanksgiving Day special where we'll be talking about the real history of Thanksgiving and how the holiday has evolved with our culture into what it is today. We also explore how this time can offer a wealth of information about ourselves and our path, and discuss how we can use these opportunities to support our growth. By reclaiming the holiday with attitudes of true gratitude and connection, we can shift the way our families interact as well. So Thanksgiving today generally is thought about as this happy time that we celebrate Thanksgiving, where the Native Americans saved the Pilgrims and they were all happy together and sharing feasts. And one big happy white and Native family. It just unfortunately that's not the way it really happened, and I think it's popular in our public history to warp it to make it seem to fit our ideals of what we would like it to be, and it's obviously purposeful. So the story actually shifted about 150 years ago, after World War I think it was. The First World War, and so they shifted it as a propaganda, and it kind of stuck ever since. Most of our history has been shifted for like a propaganda,
right?
But this in particular thing is a really big holiday. So, what really happened was back in it did have a Thanksgiving back in 1637, but what happened there is that there was a band of heavily armed hunters and colonial volunteers, and they just returned from their journey from Connecticut to Connecticut, and then they massacred 700 Pequot Indians. Mm-hmm. And then 700 men, women, and children. And they murdered them all. And so it was about land. It was about power. It was not about community
and control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it was not about community. It was not about sharing. It was about taking. Mm-hmm. It was about being thankful that we could massacre the savages, take what they had, and survive off the food we stole.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah, it kind of is a Debbie Downer for some people. Like, oh, why do you, I've seen this before. Like, why are you posting such negative things, like one person to another? I think I
usually get that every year because I post something contradictory about Thanksgiving. And somebody's like, why do you always have to bring up these negative things? It's just a holiday of family and gratitude. And I'm like, well, I'm grateful to know the truth.
Just a holiday of family and gratitude. Yeah, I think it's important to look at where this cultural idealism of Thanksgiving came from. Mm-hmm. Every year on Thanksgiving, there's a group of natives that go to the site of the massacre, and for them, it's not about family. It's not about Thanksgiving gratitude. It's about remembering the wiping out, the complete eradication of a tribe.
Right.
So they remember the day that this tribe became extinct. They remember the day these innocent women and children were wiped out. So while everybody else is thankful and celebrating turkeys,
right,
turkeys and pilgrims, and this is what we teach our children, they're remembering their fallen brethren. Mm-hmm. And I think it's
a loss of their culture.
Just another notch in the loss of the culture. Mm-hmm. So there was a note in here that we were reading on, like, some of the factual stuff that the true factual stuff that happened around that time. And was it saying that all the women and children were killed? There was the children over 14 were sold into slavery,
right, and taken back to England.
Mm-hmm. and a lot of them that did survive the attacks
escaped
mm-hmm. died of smallpox
and spread smallpox
and spread smallpox. So
not our first use of smallpox. Well, our last use, I guess, of smallpox to wipe out
no,
the population of
They generously gave people blankets to keep warm.
Germ warfare. It's been around for a long time.
It has, unfortunately.
Not new.
So I think it's important, though, to remember the true history of things. So often we forget, there's so many people that think of America as the world's greatest nation. Mm-hmm. And it's just not true.
Right.
If you look at what our CIA does, if you look at the history of the government, there's a huge, long history from the very beginning of lying to the people.
Right.
Past
propaganda.
Mm-hmm. Even the original inception, crafting of the United States, there was a little bit more to it than most people are taught. Mm-hmm. And then we have CIA guys coming out and saying they were sent into these foreign countries to kill democratic leaders who were supporting the people.
Oh, and to kill monarchies. I mean, all of the problems in the Middle East right now were created by CIA intervention during the 60s. That was...
Mm-hmm. In the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Al-Qaeda was developed by the CIA in the 80s.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But in the 60s, they went in and there was a ruling families. There were ruling families that had, tribal leaders and that had been in place for centuries, systems that have been in place. And that first unresting was really what created the platform for which then Russia came in and started conquering in the weaker states after we'd done that. And, and it's just been back and forth. So all of this, this system has been in place for a long time. It was the Brits were doing it before the Americans were doing it. Mm-hmm. And before the Brits were doing it, there was the Mughals. And I mean, this is the system by which we conquer. We create illusions so that people can feel positive and good about what's happening, by appropriating spiritual holidays of the land and turning them into Christian or turning them into, modern, developing nation kind of holidays. Mm-hmm. And it's all of our stories are done that way.
Right. So, they're all taken and warped and crafted into something else so that they can change the culture and the people.
Right.
Yeah. Like I said, it's been something that's been done for eons.
It's well proven tactic.
And it's still in place to this day.
Yes.
They go in and if you look at PSYOPs, their operations, their standard procedures, it's to go and infiltrate cultures and change the cultures from within so that weakens them, and then they can go in and wipe them out and turn the people against themselves.
Right.
When I was in Iraq, I was actually sitting in the PSYOPs listening to them talk about things like this. I can't give specifics because that was part of my secret clearance, but that's something that happened. They talked about those things. It's just really tragic, but that nobody really puts two and two together. As far as ISIS goes, I mean, I'm talking about this. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit next show, but so I don't want to get too much into it. But
and we are recording just right after the whole bombing and attacks in Paris right now for time reference.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's really fresh in the air right now for everybody. This idea of being vulnerable, but the reality is that many nations are vulnerable to our actions on a daily basis.
Right. I mean, they're in Iraq. It's a completely different story than the idealism that Americans hold.
Right.
They look at Americans as the invaders.
Right.
We talk about, the news talks about how many soldiers we lost over there. It's around 6,000, 68,000, something like that. Mm-hmm. Over there, they look at it as well over 1 million innocent Iraqi women and children and civilians were murdered, were killed in the bombings and the drone strikes. Right. They look at ISIS. Many of the Muslims in these countries, they look at ISIS as a CIA plot to support the invasion.
Exactly. Yeah, I've heard that also actually from other resources.
Mm-hmm. So they don't look at it the same way we do. They're not like, ISIS, pro-ISIS. But then you have these fundamentalists who are spreading this propaganda and saying, look at all these Islamic extremists. We must go and invade and stop the terrorisms.
Right.
But, looking at the facts of the situation, you got the talking about the bombing in France, the passports were fake. Mm-hmm. So they're like, look at these Pakistani people. Look at these people. They were
right,
terrorists.
and that passports were left like virtually undamaged in a blown up building.
So virtually undamaged in a blown up building with everything around it is charred.
Yeah.
I mean, so that screams that it was obviously laid there after the fact.
Right.
Then there was somebody else who had mentioned in a comment, and I didn't find anything to back this up, so I don't have any sources to cite for this, but they mentioned in a comment that the people who blew themselves up were actually, I know one was Algerian, another one was Bulgarian, and one was French. So they weren't these. They weren't Iraqi. They weren't Arabic. They were actually more local than that, and from different areas.
Yeah.
So I mean, it just screams false flag.
Right.
When you look at the bigger picture of everything together, there's also been a lot of uprising in France.
Right. There's been a lot of problems with the Muslim and the French culture. You know, I mean, France for a while has been trying to, we're making it illegal for women to wear head coverings in schools. And I mean, this has been a problem where, and it's, in France, they have a lot of, France is very protective of their culture. They view it as this sacred culture, even their language. They create a new word for everything in French. So even email, they won't use the word email. I can't remember what it is, but it's some other word to describe internet and mail to combine together because they want to preserve their culture and their language. And I can understand that as a national identity. We are starting to lose our national identities. At the same time, they're poking at their own population. They're poking at their Islamic population, and it's creating fear amongst those who aren't a part of the extremists, which is the vast majority of Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians, and we just have all this fear around it. Just the other day, my husband and I were at an Indian restaurant, and there was a group of men, and they were talking, and I was like, "Oh, that's not Persian, that's not Farsi. What are you speaking?" And he said, "Oh, it's Arabic." And I was like, "Oh, far out." And so, but he was really like concerned to even tell me that he was speaking Arabic, and I hadn't heard about the attack in Paris yet. At that point, it was the same day. And I asked him, I was like, why do you say it like that? Why do you always hide it? And I've noticed this with Arabic speaking people before too.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, it's not a good climate to be speaking Arabic in. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess not. Americans do get a little weird. And he goes, especially not today. And I said, why today? And he goes, oh, you didn't hear? And he told me about it. And that was my first time hearing about it. But the idea that, the idea of on this holiday, bringing it back to Thanksgiving and that on this holiday, we're supposed to be grateful and we're supposed to feel generous and we're supposed to, come together and feed each other and, and enjoy the bounty. That's a wonderful idea if that's what it really were.
Absolutely.
And I think there was another thing that we were reading when we were reading about the true history, and it was talking about how in the that Thanksgiving in reality is probably one of the most ancient of holidays. The concept of enjoying the bounty after the feast, after the harvest, and all that comes from the harvest, and that now we're going into a darker time, and we're coming in together, and everyone's coming into their homes, and now we're huddling together, and that feasting, that last feasting before the winter months set in. It was talking about how it's really a prehistoric type of holiday.
Yeah, I think it was talking about how the natives did that. They would gather up their harvest of their corn and grains.
Everyone would bring what they had. Yeah. And I think that if you look at many cultures that are seasonal, at least, I think you'll find that they do have these kinds of feastings and these kinds of concepts, like even Christmas dinner. Long before there was a Christ, Christmas dinners were celebrated, and it was celebrated as festivals of lights and festivals of, in the darkness, bringing light into the darkness.
Well, yeah, Christmas, I mean, they changed the date
right.
to accommodate the pagan holiday, and that's where the Christmas tree came from. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and there's some, like the Christmas tree also, came from Germany, and the concept of and it was outside, and you'd put the candles outside on the tree so that people could find your home on this, special night, and the lighting up of everything. It was still a festival of lighting. So yeah, I think when we talk about Thanksgiving, it's important to be aware of where it comes from, of what we're actually celebrating, and then to set some intentions to change the celebration. And maybe we can reclaim the holiday. I don't know. What do you think?
I think you can be, I think you're exactly right. We can reclaim the holiday, but reclaim it in a way that remembers what really happened. Mm-hmm. Being thankful that you're aware, being thankful for what you have, being thankful that you live in a time where we can actually create change. Mm-hmm. So being thankful for those things, but being also aware of the true history, being aware of what really happened. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's important to know the truth, but it's important not to be ignorant, willfully ignorant, because you're ignoring the uncomfortableness of what really happened. So, just like most people, most Christians even, who are aware that the Christmas tree came from a pagan holiday, they still enjoy the Christmas tree. I used to love Christmas trees growing up because I love the smell of it in the house. I love the feel of filling everything with decorations. It was kind of like this cheery, exciting time, and loved the hot cocoa and eggnog with rum.
I know my neighbor's having an eggnog party soon, and I can't wait.
Oh, that's nice.
She makes it from scratch. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, and I grew to love all those things, and so but it doesn't take away from the fact of where it came from. I personally have no problems with either tradition. For me, I'm not a Christian, so I don't really think about Thanksgiving as a time for remembering Christ. But I don't celebrate the pagan thing either. So I don't really think about Christmas trees as whatever it originally came from. But I enjoy both of them for what they are. It's a time for family and to get together and share meals. So that's what it came to be for me. But I don't forget what really happened. I don't forget the history.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. In our household, for me, my birthday every 7 years falls on Thanksgiving. So to me, I was always trying to avoid anyone knowing it was my birthday because I didn't like it being turned into a big fuss or, anything like that. I don't know. I was always very weird about my birthday when I was a kid. And because my birthday was so close to Thanksgiving and Christmas, it would always kind of just get glossed over.
The side.
Yeah. And I was very comfortable with that. So when Thanksgiving would come around, I would do everything I could to make it not be about my birthday. And so I was always like, I'd get really excited. And especially when I was younger and we lived on the East Coast. And when we were on the East Coast, I felt like it was a very different. Thanksgiving was a lot more traditional. It had a lot more structure to it and ideas about how it was supposed to be. And we learned about it in the schools. All of us made the turkey, the plate out of the turkey feathers, using paper plate and construction paper. And then we'd make the Indian feather, and some of us would be Indians and some of us would be pilgrims. We make pilgrim hats, and, we learned the whole really traditional American, Thanksgiving value system. And then when I was in third grade, we moved to New Mexico. That's a whole other value system there. And it was much more focused on the truth of it. And of course, Thanksgiving just wasn't as celebrated there. It wasn't as big of a deal. So you would see a lot of, especially where we were in New Mexico, there was a lot of different cultures gathered together in this little village because there was a lot of industry, so there was engineers from all around the world. And so it would be a lot of people playing at Thanksgiving, how is it supposed to be? And everything would be smothered in green chili sauce. So it was and that was my first time of really getting permission, I guess, to not have to celebrate it the way everyone else was celebrating it, and starting to see these different systems. And so I went to a big Thanksgiving dinner actually with a good friend of mine who was I want to say she was a Hopi Indian. And it was all of her family. They rented this huge warehouse, and it was like there was some turkey there, but there was every other kind of meat you can imagine, and foods and spreads. And so from that point forward, I just started we started shifting our family. We would think of Thanksgiving in a different way. We would just more so think of it in terms of, gathering people together. And I've always loved that. So my Thanksgiving dinners have rarely just been family affairs. And in fact, I don't think I've actually done a family Thanksgiving in, quite a few years. Quite a few years. I normally have friend Thanksgivings, and I'm always looking for orphans. You don't have anywhere to go? Come on over. And sometimes we do a not yet Thanksgiving feast.
I like those.
I know.
I like Thanksgiving with friends. We used to do that a lot because I was in the military. So what else do we do?
Right.
Sometimes we had Thanksgiving pizza.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and that was kind of like what we were talking about.
Right.
About the second part of our show, where we were talking about, not just what the history of Thanksgiving is, but what is it now? What is it really for people now? And what I hear about is stress. I keep hearing about stress. I hear like, oh, I'd love to do, when I talk about like my friend Thanksgivings and stuff, invite somebody and they're like, oh, I'd love to, but we have to go do the family thing. They get upset. And every year they have to go do the family thing, or everyone would be upset. And no.
I don't know why it has to be like that.
I don't either.
But, for most people though, it's because it's the time for family, and family is like it's a mixed bag for a lot of people.
Right.
Because you're not just dealing with your immediate family, your chosen family. You're dealing with the family you didn't choose as well, that you were born into. And sometimes that it's a good time for reflection and mirroring and seeing your growth expressed in those around you by your reactions, how it could be. So, for some people, Thanksgiving is a really happy time, and for those people, they're really blessed. For some people, they had to get there, coming from a different place, and for some people, it could be quite uncomfortable at times.
Well, yeah. There's also I remember for myself, I had step parents and step grandparents and, all of that stuff. So the difference between going to a step family Thanksgiving where you're observing someone else's family dynamic that you didn't actually grow up in, that was always really interesting to me to watch how that would go, and how the sexes would divide, and the women would go to the kitchen and the men would go in front of the TV and they'd be watching the sports.
Oh yeah.
And I'd always go with the men, because I was always like, I'm in the kitchen all the time. I don't want to be cooking today. And it's all the women gossiping, and the men are out talking about interesting things. So I would go sit in with the men, and they'd always look at me like, aren't you going to go help in the kitchen? I'm like, aren't you? Like, that's a heavy bird. Why don't you lift it out?
Yeah, the sports thing. I was never into the sports thing. So sometimes I'd like to hang out in the kitchen. I was like, I could give a crap less about football. Sorry, guys. I really don't like football.
What I love was the stories they'd tell while they're watching it.
I do like UFC.
I do. Did you see that fight with Ronda Rousey?
I did.
That was so awesome. I was crying. Like, I couldn't believe the emotional intensity. Oh, that was awesome. See, now why don't they have UFC fighting during Thanksgiving?
It's interesting. I've noticed, though, my perception of UFC and boxing, that even that's changed. I'll watch that before I watch any other sport, well, except for extreme sports. I like those. But even my perception of that has changed a little bit. It's like, I think about it from like an empathic perspective. Yeah, so I'm looking at it going, why is she like that?
When I watch it, like every time I see the blow come, I'm like, it feels, and I feel like I'm getting hit, and then I'm like, duck, and I really feel like I'm in it, and that's I love that about that.
I look at things. I tend to look at life, from a spiritual lens, and I think if this person were enlightened, would they still be in that ring?
Well, look, how about all of the monks that are trained in fighting?
They're trained in fighting.
And they use the training in the fighting as a means of, coming into wholeness of themselves and understanding their weaknesses and their strengths. And
yeah, but that's more centered around self-growth.
Mm-hmm.
Most of our martial arts today that we see, like through UFC, is not for growth; it's for show.
Well, I don't know.
And
my
for
son's
profit.
been training in MMA for the last 6 years, and he goes to a gym.
And he's doing it for growth.
Yeah, and their focus there very much so is growth, personal growth and personal development. And to be able to push the body to its extremes and what can it do, so, there's a woman that's a fighter through Svasa's gym that's pretty amazing. She's when she's gone in competition, she places pretty well, and I was talking with her about it, and we were talking about the difference between like Ronda Rousey and Heidi Holmes, or Holly Holmes, and the difference between the two is one has already achieved Holly already had achieved, world championship status as a boxer, as a kickboxer.
Right.
And so she'd already kind of gone through this evolution as a fighter, and now bringing that growth into this ring of MMA as a new fighter in MMA, in a sense. She had this maturity to her, where Ronda Rousey has been undefeated. She's probably never seen her own blood coming out of her nose before. And you could see just by the shock on her face.
Yeah, she just looked shocked.
She had never received that sort of a deliverance of humility before. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the beauty in the fighting aspect of martial arts, is that it is a way of comparing yourself to another, seeing your growth and development, and then receiving a whole nother perspective. Because here Rhonda's like defeated and on the mat, and you could tell she didn't want to get up. Well, yeah, it hurt, but she also was very embarrassed, and you could see the shame and all of that. And that Holly's right there at her feet. No, you did a great job. You did your best. And her intention was to be there for Rhonda as her opponent. And so I think that kind of an evolution of self is amazing to watch. And you would never get that perspective if you didn't ever have the ring battle between the two of them in the first place.
Yeah, I did see that as far as emotional character.
Oh yeah, way more developed.
She was way more developed than Ronda Rousey was.
Yeah.
And I definitely appreciated like that kind of character about her. And you could see like in the talks before and after, and really that inner quality she had about herself. Mm-hmm. And you really appreciate those people when you see them, how they can go into a ring, get into this fight with this other person, give it their all to try and physically demolish this other person to win, and then have no you could tell that even win or lose, she would have no hard feelings toward Ronda Rousey.
Yeah, none. Yeah.
And Ronda Rousey would build up this scene. Part of it's the drama.
Right. Well, it is UFC.
It is UFC.
We don't have WWF anymore.
Well,
we do.
We do, unfortunately.
Who watches that?
Like I remember watching that as a kid, and
Me too.
And I was like,
Hogan was awesome.
I was like, oh, wrestling, and then they're like, oh, it's all acting. I was like, acting?
Well, it's not all acting. I mean, there is a lot of acting going on in there, but there's some wrestling too.
It's mostly acting. I mean, they do acrobatics,
right?
Like the pinch the leg when it's too much, and
and the flopping around, and
the
slapping of the mat,
the stomping your leg
when
you
climb up on the ring
people.
And then leap onto.
Yeah, they're like, and they leap and they land on the person when their elbows and things out, so they're not really crushing the person. But
so I think I know why they don't have UFC fighting at Thanksgiving. Because with the family affairs, like sometimes the family gatherings can be a little UFC. Have you ever been to one of those?
A family UFC gathering?
Yeah.
No.
I remember we stopped doing family gatherings because in my bigger family, so many cousins had married cousins, and like so many of like one cousin was married to this woman, and then she had an affair, and that came out at some holiday function, and then she left him and went to the other cousin, and I mean we have like all this drama in our family. And
sounds a little Southern if you ask me.
No, it doesn't even have to be Southern. It's small towny, and it's crazy. And we used to have the police get called sometimes.
Wow.
Like it was some messy.
So what would your message about reflections and adopting attitudes of gratitude? So what would your message about that be? Is in a reflection on
I think
you grew up.
Well, yeah, I think one of the things that I learned was a huge and immense gratitude for being myself and not any of them, like just for my own perspective of self. But when we can start to shift our perspective away from, with Thanksgiving is about finding gratitude. And, everyone's supposed to sit around the table and say what they're grateful for, in the Thanksgiving warm up. What do you call that? The opening to Thanksgiving dinner? I don't even know. Yeah. And what I find is that people often don't really have much to say. They can't think of a lot. Well, I'm grateful to be here with you all, or they don't have a lot. But I would offer that if you can bring your attitude of gratitude to everything in your life before Thanksgiving even comes around, and you start with that, recognizing that that you're sitting at a table, like in a house, and it's warm, and you're not outside, and you're not on the street. Go and take your leftover Thanksgiving dinner to find somebody. That's one of our traditions that we do, is we wrap up a certain number of plates, and then we go find homeless people and take a lot of our leftovers out to homeless people so that we can find ways to help foster gratitude for ourselves. I'm grateful I'm not on the street, and I'm going to show my gratitude by helping somebody who is. Mm-hmm. I'm grateful that I have a meal, so I'm going to show that gratitude by sharing it with those who don't. I think then that can take the focus away from being on the family. I have one friend who was stressed out every year when she'd have to return to her family for Thanksgiving because she was still single, and she didn't want to have to hear all the questions about, who's she dating, or why she's still single, or what's really wrong with her. So it was, for her, every year it was stressful. It was a stressful thing. And I'd be like, why do you go back? Why don't you spend Thanksgiving with us this year? And she never would give herself permission. So giving yourself permission to recognize the truth of what the experience is, and making a choice to actually participate or not.
Yeah, you always have that choice, mm-hmm. and you need to give yourself permission to have that choice and own that choice. Because if you're going into a miserable situation where nothing you do seems to work, mm-hmm. and no matter what, there's conflict, mm-hmm. and it seems like you're the target, there could be some truth to that. It could be that you need to look at, like, if you actually feel like a target, mm-hmm. or you really are. Mm-hmm. But if there's no hope of salvaging any of the relationship, and no matter what you do, you need to give yourself permission to leave, right. to go have the experience that you're actually looking for around that time, which is mm-hmm. community, fellowship. Yeah. Mm-hmm. For me, like we had some family stuff come up. And usually when we do gather, we just tend to put everything behind us. So we ignore any kind of like tension we may have, or try to, with any of the other people there. Sometimes it's harder, but then there's been other cases where like somebody was uncomfortable with me as an extended member of the family, so I wasn't invited. I was like, okay.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. Well, one time I grew up in a mindset that, like, you have a friend that doesn't have anywhere to go, you bring them.
Exactly.
You have a girlfriend, maybe you just started dating, that's okay, bring them. Mm-hmm. Anywhere in your life that you want to bring into this Thanksgiving to enjoy a feast with people when they don't have a place to go, bring them. Mm-hmm. So that's the mindset that I grew up with. But this person wasn't comfortable with that, and I assumed it would be okay, so I just brought them, and it upset her placing of the plates at the table.
Well, that is really important to some people.
Yeah.
Like the place setting, the presentation, and then it's like, well, how grateful are you? You know, like, are you on show or are you celebrating?
Yeah, I was like, well, I'll go eat dinner with my friends, and they want me there, you know. Yeah. And then my mom was like, well, if you can't go, then I'm not going.
Yeah.
And my brother's like, I don't want to go either. So I just had dinner with them too,
right, you know. Right.
So don't go where you're not wanted.
Right. Well, it's funny. I had a falling out with my family many years back, and my brother makes a lot of choices that are not very. We'll just go on from that.
Yeah.
And my mother, my grandmother was passing. She had cancer, and she really wanted every holiday to be spent with the whole family. And it was our first time everyone coming together. And my mom called, and we decided we'd do Thanksgiving in my house because I had the facilities to handle everybody. And so we had, probably, like about 35, 45 family members come. And my mom calls me up and she's like, so can your brother come? And I was like, well, of course he can come, Mom. I'm not going to say he can't come to our family Thanksgiving when it's all of our family gathered. But because the drama wasn't enough, like she was like, well, you said he's not allowed in your house. And I'm like, well, yeah, but I'm making an exception. It's fine. And she goes, well, then you're going to need to tell him that it's okay. And it was just all this drama around it, all this drama that didn't need to be there, when the truth of it was we're having a big family Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. And this was the last time I did a family Thanksgiving.
Well, there's another truth there too.
Yeah.
BPD.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you just need to create the drama when it's not enough.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've had a lot more of these family conflicts at Thanksgiving and holidays. Like for us, it's been minimal. Most people, most of the time, except for kind of when I wasn't invited, but we put our stuff aside, and for sometimes there'd be a little conflicts, and some people would bitch, and then my grandma would say, "Oh, just shut the fuck up."
Right.
Sorry.
Well, yeah, I remember I went to one, it was a step family Thanksgiving, and I was there, and they actually told me not to bring Pratik because we had a child, but we weren't married yet. Mm-hmm. And so they didn't feel like he was necessarily a part of the family yet. And I was really like, that was my last time going to that Thanksgiving. But the whole time I was there, as I was watching, the grandmother, the matriarch of the family, she was watching how much food everybody ate and was commenting on it. So like, I was a big person, so I was eating way too much food in her mind, even though I just had one plate. And her granddaughter, who was starting to get big, she already had way too much food. She shouldn't have any food on her plate. And then none of the men had enough food. She was constantly trying to give them more food, more food on their plate, or the women that were too skinny, more food. It was like she was trying to control how everybody ate, and this was her one day to do it. It's just like, never coming to this again. No. Never attending this function ever again.
So how do you how would you suggest that our audience here deal with difficult people that they're likely going to encounter maybe in their family settings, if they choose to go, and something erupts? How would you suggest that they deal with it?
Well, I think that it's going to take a little bit more preparation than just for that day. It's going to have to become a part of your lifestyle, how you handle people like that. If you have them in your life, then there's a reason. You need to learn yourself, how to hold yourself, how to respect yourself, how to have your own boundaries. So I think the very first thing to know is expect that something will happen. If things tend to happen, expect that it will happen and prepare for that. Have a game plan. Have an exit strategy. I loved it. One woman was telling me this, and it was actually advice for me as a business person. What do I do when I get a client that I don't necessarily want to work with? Mm-hmm. And she was like, well, you need to have your exit strategy planned out in advance and have some backup phrases in your pocket to pull out so you can use them whenever. And it was brilliant. It was like, so have an exit strategy, whether it's, my stomach was bugging me earlier and I think I need to go home. I've got some runs or something. Like, you can make it be about whatever you want, like whatever's going to get you out the door, oh my God, I forgot I left something on, or whatever it is, you can always have an exit strategy and recognize the patterns that are happening, looking to see what the patterns are. If you've got, a grandpa that once he gets, 3 cups of eggnog, then he's going to start being a jerk. Well, recognize that. See how many cups is he at, and maybe avoid him from that point forward. So being real about what it is that you're dealing with and giving yourself permission to leave if it starts to go south.
I usually do have an exit strategy myself. Not always intentional, but I would prep everybody. Hey, I'll be here for I don't know how long. Yeah. I've got another dinner to go to. So that was my exit strategy, because I had dinner with friends too.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it wasn't intended to be that way. It was just like okay, I'm going to go visit some friends.
Well, I personally keep one for everything, the exit strategies, because you never know when you need to leave a situation.
Is that what you've been doing?
No, Brandon, never. I'm just kidding. But it's one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever been given is having that. If I'm on the phone with somebody and, you can't get off the phone with some people, having those phrases or things that you can use. Another thing is really grounding yourself. We talk a lot about meditation and grounding, and before I have, if I'm hosting any sort of a dinner, holiday dinner, I always plan for about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour before people come to not be doing anything. That time is for me to relax, to regroup, to come back into myself. I usually lock the bathroom door. It's usually when I take my shower or something like that to get ready. And I create a space for myself that is all mine. And that's even if I'm going to go to somebody else's house, I do the same thing, because then I'm not stepping in or having people walk in when I'm frantic and everything is stressed and I'm trying to get everything done. And that gives me a lot of comfort, and a lot of being grounded helps you deal with whatever it is that's going on around you without having to feel like you're riding those waves as well. So yeah, I would suggest meditation, exit strategies, and aligning your expectations with what your reality and your experience is.
I think also, when going back to the mirror aspect of it,
yes,
serious introspection.
Yeah.
So if you are being triggered and you know that this certain person triggers you every time that you see him, or these certain conflicts come up, why are you being triggered? Where is the source of your trigger? And if you are being triggered, there's only one place to look.
Right.
And that's within. And that's not going to come in one meal. That's not going to come up at the dinner where you can look and resolve your triggers. You can't go through it in one conversation usually. It's going to take some deep inner work through, like you said, meditation, or getting the help of some healers or counselors or something to help them work through what usually is a long pattern or history where some sort of core wound developed at some point. Because if you weren't being triggered, if you didn't have this personal reaction and this feeling inside of you, then really it wouldn't matter what they did so much.
Right.
Because you wouldn't react the same way.
Right.
When you can keep calm no matter what the other person's doing, unless of course they're physically attacking you, then that's another situation. But don't keep calm and carry on.
Then you exit. Well, and the mirroring is excellent. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's such a critical part of learning how and why you're reacting the way you are to what's going on. Because you can be grounded, you can be centered, and you can still have stuff going on around you and stay that way. But if you're triggered, then you can't stay grounded and centered. And so looking for those things that pull you off is a great way to look at, what do I need to focus on now? What's coming up for me now, because I'm reacting to this in the environment or in behavior, or this particular type of, there's some people get triggers for foods and smells and all kinds of things. So it could be something beyond just what the family is doing or the time of year. Some people, just that time time of year is really stressful because maybe in their family there was a lot of stress about whether or not they can or can't do it, or,
well, family is the biggest trigger for anyone, really. That's usually the biggest trigger. So, going at family time when you have these triggers with family members can be a way to actually test yourself and see where you're really at.
Yeah.
So that's true too. And if you're having triggers to something, like you said, that the smells or the tastes or the foods or something like that, usually there's some sort of Pavlov's dog experience going on,
right,
where it's actually an association to another memory.
Yeah.
So that's what's usually going on there. So that's another thing to look into if you're having those kind of experiences.
Yeah. So anyone who's on the healing path can look at this as an opportunity, an opportunity to find more work, an opportunity to look at where's the deeper connections. It's a great
Absolutely.
point. Yeah. Well, that about wraps up our discussion for Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. And
happy real Thanksgiving.
Yeah. And try to find your own, your own traditions and your own system. I know one family, all they have is lasagna for Thanksgiving. That's their Thanksgiving feast every year. So give yourself some permission to make it your own holiday, and try to take a little bit of time to remember and be grateful for the ability we have in this current age to see the truth about things and research and all this wealth of awareness that we have, and use it in your own traditions.
Whether you have turkey or tofurkey.
Or what is that word? Turducken?
Turducken.
That's where they have like the turkey with the duck with the chicken. I don't know. It's all together. I don't know why people like stuffing carcasses inside of each other, but. And we'll see you next week. You can find our show on YouTube, Libsyn, Facebook at TheCrystalCocoon, or you can email us at TheCrystalCocoon@gmail.com. And we look forward to hearing from you all. Happy Thanksgiving.